good day, everybody. Welcome back to this wonderful series, Beyond the Seven, live from Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron Dovid Poston, who has been teaching us the wonderful book, The 48 Ways to Wisdom. And today we're on part 48. But like he mentioned to us last week, it's not the end. The book by Rabbi Weiner actually has 50 parts to it. So we will be having a couple more. Baruch Hashem after this class, but it's been exciting. I loved last week's lesson, learning in order to do last week's lesson. If you didn't catch it, you can catch it in the No Hide World Center YouTube, or you can find it on Yiboneh. It's beautiful. It was a beautiful lesson, and I'm sure today's going to be just as good. So let's just jump right in and see how the rabbi's doing. Shalom, Rabbi. You're live on the air. We're going to turn it over to you. It's so good to be with you, and we so appreciate you staying up late there in Jerusalem to share with us the beauty of Torah. You're live, Rabbi.
Shalom Aleichem, Dan, and all your viewers, all the subscribers. Can you hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know why. You're a little blurry.
Yeah,
it went a little blurry as well. Can you hear me?
Dan?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try to... I can hear you. I'm going to try to fix what I'm doing. Okay, you can hear me better now.
Yes, I can hear you, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I had too much stuff going on my computer. I just closed a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so hopefully that would make a solution.
Lighten the load, yeah.
All I said so far was, I'm so glad to be back, Dan, and I'm so in front of your viewers and your subscribers, and we're in for, I would have thought it would have been the grand finale, but the truth be told, that I mentioned last week already, that in the book that's behind me, even though there are 48 ways to wisdom, the Rosh Yeshiva did find other manuscripts that had different one of the 48 ways. Several of them were broken into two, or there were different nusachot, different versions. So he wanted to be complete, and he, in his book, made 50 ways to wisdom. So I don't see why not, right? Let's cover them all. Rabbi Weinberg, as you mentioned, is the author, or the
right.
The creator of such a fantastic program. However, this is based on ancient Jewish wisdom from Pirkei Avot, chapter 6, Mishnah 6, and I actually feel very privileged to have been able to give over so far. I mean, so far, right?
Yeah, it's been a long journey for sure.
The last, yeah. Today's topic, number 48, is Machim et Rabo. Now, it's actually, when you read the title, it's counterintuitive, making the teacher wise. You have to ask, well, how is that going to make you wise? Well, it's not that counterintuitive if you really think about it. The wiser your teacher is, the more wisdom you can obtain. So it's not counterintuitive at all. But the counterintuitive part would be, and I just mentioned counterintuitive because if it's something intuitive, you don't need to teach it. Okay, that's like something we've discussed many times. Something that is so obvious, you don't need to teach it. So in Jewish wisdom, the things that you're really learning, hopefully, are things that are counterintuitive. So the mystical side of making your teacher wise, how is that going to make you wiser? Well, I think it should be obvious, right? The wiser your teacher is, the more wisdom then you can obtain. The question is how to go about doing it. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go through a few ideas first, and then get into the sources. Although every now and then I'm like, oh, now's a great time. Let's just go through the source, even though it's not in order. So I'll try to behave myself, try to hold myself back. And to start off with the idea that we spoke about this before in Gemara Ta'anit 7a. But before I even go into this, when we started this Beyond the Seven, and specifically the 48 Ways to Wisdom, why is this specifically being taught on a Noachad channel? And from what I know, the people that are watching you are seekers of wisdom. And just in general, Beyond the Seven means that knowing that the 7 Noachai laws are not just 7 very specific laws,
Deep and wide.
but
Deep and wide.
major categories with many subcategories, keeping in mind, if you should go back and watch from the beginning of the series, that also logical mitzvot, things to do with ethics and morality, are still obligated, even if they're not specified outright in the 7. So there's a lot to learn. And since you're searchers, I think that it's, well, let's just say the basics of how to acquire wisdom is so necessary, because we're living in a society where, I guess, there's so many problems with society, but one of them is the instant gratification. You know, you want to learn something real quick, so you go to a YouTube tutorial, or you just check out a 3-minute video on the topic, and that's not really, it's not really sufficient. Yeah. It's not going to help you really acquire. So we focused on these ideas, the 6 constant mitzvahs, the 48 ways to wisdom, specifically the 48 ways to wisdom, because as someone who is a searcher, you have to know why you know something, right? As the Rosh Yeshiva says, 5-finger clarity. Just like I know that I have 5 fingers on this hand, that's how clear I have to know, or should know, whatever it is that I'm seeking to have knowledge about, acquire knowledge about. So these, just to go back again to the idea that these are the 48, let's say, during the leaving of Egypt until we arrived at the revelation at Sinai, we were 48 levels. We were 49 levels below 0 in terms of impurity. And not only did we just go from 49 up to, minus to 0, that's not what happened. We went from minus 49 to plus 49 in order to receive the Torah, which is on the 50th level, on the 50th day. So each day is a journey, which hopefully reverses many of the misconceptions, and I'm going to use the word cognitive dissonance, because that is one of the topics for tonight, one of the things we're going to discuss tonight. You know, when you're so emotionally wrapped up into a position, it really hinders your ability to come to the truth, because I'm saying people who are afflicted with cognitive dissonance. Yes, it's mostly an emotional response, but it affects the brain. I mean, you can have the evidence sitting right in front of you, and it's the emotions that's blocking you. You're not willing to be honest with yourself. You're so emotionally, whoever it is so emotional. They are so emotionally enwrapped in their position that they're not willing to open their minds up
to the reality. Yeah.
So
warped reality for sure.
So we're going to discuss these ideas. So we're going to start off with the Gemara Tain at 7a. We've heard this before. Rabbi Chanina said, true, I have learned a lot from my teachers. Okay, we've learned a lot from our teachers. And I learned even more from my colleagues, meaning my associates, people on my level. But I learned the most from my students. Now, we've discussed this before. Keep this in mind. Tonight's topic is making the teacher wise. So this is from the teacher's perspective already. Who did he learn the most from? His students. So we see that the student has the ability, even though it's coming from the teacher's perspective, to actually help create a more wiser teacher, which will only in the end benefit you. The consequences of a wiser teacher is your ability, hopefully as a student, to even gain more wisdom.
Sure.
So these are like, maybe it seems to be quite obvious, but the question is how to go about doing it with the utmost respect for your teacher, right? Number one, you're not just going to accept whatever your teachers or your mentors tell you, right? The Rosh Yeshiva gives an example, just for those who remember, there used to be a clothing store, at least in New Jersey. I was from Philadelphia, so they had it in Philadelphia, or I forget, maybe we went across the bridge to New Jersey. So people in New York also are familiar with Sal Sims. I think that was his name. But anyway, the name of the store was Sims. So they used to advertise an educated consumer is the best consumer, right? So it would be, first of all, as an advertisement, it's great to give, to uplift your own audience, that you're giving them praise. But it's true, right? right? They always had these, consumer magazines. If you're going to buy a car, whatever it is you're going to purchase, at least you should be educated for whatever type of car you're buying it for whatever reason. Also, I guess when you have complaints, you know what the complaints are before you get into something. Okay, so this is an idea. So what you should do, you have to critically examine whatever you're being taught. I mean, this is what Judaism teach. Use your brain, right? Use your intellect. In fact, we discussed this before, that the Rambam, well, let's just talk about the word seichel. Seichel in, let's say, modern usage means intelligence. And that's how the Rambam uses the word seichel, as intellect. And this is something that is unique amongst human beings, all human beings, that animals certainly don't have, and unfortunately, a lot of humans don't use it, right? And in Maharalian terms, the word seichel is inferring a spirit, something spiritual. Now, where else does the spirit lie other than, you've seen all the pictures with halos or auras, yes, there's no denying that's where the neshama sits, the highest, one of the highest levels of our soul. So the idea that I like to do is to take both definitions and combine them and call it a spiritual intellect, because they both had just a perspective of seichel. And it makes a lot of sense to me. So when you're probing your rabbi, you're probing your teacher, intellectually, you are activating the soul. There's no question about it. You're looking for the truth. And this is it's part of your spiritual journey. Okay, so what do we do? How do we begin? So there's a lot of source material. Like I said, I want to try to keep that to the end, but I have a feeling I won't be able to. So there's a first example here is, let's see, where is it? I know I have, see, Abaya and Rabbah were somewhat contemporaries, and yet one would always test the other. So Rabbah would teach Abaya, and what he would do, I can't find the source right here, but it is here somewhere. He would always give him some kind of logic that was not sound. And he was anticipating the student already working through his teaching in order to come back. Many teachers want to test the students, see if they're even awake, if they're thinking, right? You're just sitting like a log, doing nothing in a class. No. So this was more like a chavruta, and he would do this on purpose to try to motivate the student to I guess we call upslug the logic, right? If you're trying to tell me something, I could pick holes through it right away, and that would be a good thing. So I know my ego wouldn't let me do that, right? I don't want to present anything that's so wrong that could be, today, people put recorders and tape you, and I would be afraid to be misquoted and saying something so unusually wrong. But that's just me, right? But this is way back in the day. They didn't have all that, and he wasn't afraid of that. So that would be something that he would do, just as an example. But the idea is, don't be afraid to challenge whatever's being presented, right? A good teacher is actually delighted to hear the students' sharp questions. That's what a teacher should be, right? And the critical thinking. And the Rosh Yeshiva says, because a room full of parrots or mindless tape recorders is of little value, right? Now, of course, whenever you do this, it has to be done with respect, whether it's your teacher or your parent, right? So make sure this is how you should express when you're hearing something that doesn't make sense. Pardon me, excuse me, I don't understand how you came to that conclusion, because it seems incorrect to me for the following reasons. Now, I know the emotions get a hold of us, and we're not apt to act like this, and we need to respond with a lot of respect. But make sure first you've analyzed the matter carefully, and that you can clearly articulate and substantiate your own objections. This is a very important line. Don't just object for the sake of objection. There are people that do that. The Gemara does not have very nice things to say about people like this. These are not the kind of people you want as your students, but it's hard to pick them out because on a certain level, you want to judge your students favorably. And so many times, I think I'm getting around to it, where I really do understand that my student is missing some crucial information, and it's probably my fault. So let's go back through the argument from the beginning or somewhere in the middle, make sure that he has the foundations. Because if he's coming to the wrong conclusion and already accusing me of being so wrong, I want to understand. And usually we get to the bottom of it and we figure it out. So as a teacher, right, don't always assume, unless you have a track record with this particular student, that they're only looking for attention. They want to be the class clown, so to speak, and always slug up the rabbi. It's a big test for rabbis as well, teachers as well. So another aspect is if you considering your teacher wise, why else are you coming to learn with him? You obviously feel that he has something to give you, right? So always assume your teacher is saying something intelligent and worthwhile. Remember, he has the credentials. He also has the life experience and the wisdom. At least give him a fair hearing and take the time to understand and examine whatever he's trying to express. Don't dismiss right away by saying, it's ridiculous, it doesn't make sense, right? And this is what your gut sometimes tells you. But don't dismiss him outright or assume that you know better. Rather, try to listen better. Again, put your objections on the side. This is where the idea of cognitive dissonance comes into, right? Give him the chance to fully explain his position. Now, we also have discussed this idea between Shammai and Hillel. Hillel actually had a majority of students. And we know the Torah says you follow the majority to do good, right? Don't follow the majority to do evil. So even though the Gemara says that Shammai was sharper, let's say, what does that mean? It was more intelligent, right? The sharper intelligence. And therefore, we're not going to just finally follow Shammai. In fact, even his own students, I'm sure, did not. Nevertheless, we follow Hillel, which sometimes, let's just say, a majority of the times, seems to be, let's say, the more lenient opinion. So the question always was, why did he have more students? So there was a few reasons why. Not only was he seemingly kinder and more patient from the stories we hear about him, but what he always did, and always did, I just can't repeat this enough, he made sure that when he heard the argument of Shammai, he actually proposed, you state your opinion first. And he would repeat back to Shammai whatever he thought he understood and asked, is it correct? Do I understand you correctly? Now, obviously, if once you understand it correctly and you agree with it, there's no argument, okay? And only after you think you fully understand it, then you can begin to, let's say, poke holes or, ask some real critical questions that could make that, the house of cards fall apart. So it was a sense of humility and good character in which he used and utilized. And so perhaps that's the reason he had the majority of students. In other words, we follow him because he had the majority of students. The question is, why did he have the majority of students? So this seems to be several different character traits that we discussed. But later on, Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah, and you'll see later on in the Gemara as well, others did the same thing. They always put Shammai first. In every Mishnah that Shammai and Hillel ever have discussions, Shammai is always first. So even Yehuda Nasi, who comes from Hillel, carried on the tradition. So it's obviously a very important thing. Again, we're talking about making your teacher wise, right? So perhaps Hillel actually looked at Shammai because he was, a sharper individual, and and we consider him wiser. So I think that he looked at him his own teacher, and with utmost respect, he did everything he could to try to understand the other point of view before raising any objections. Okay, here's more about the cognitive dissonance idea. So he discusses being emotionally invested in your own position is one of the biggest obstacles to learning from our teachers and giving them a fair chance. Right? Their position may strike a sore point in us, causing us to feel threatened, which puts us on the defensive and generates this idea of called cognitive dissonance. Now, when your gut reaction is one of denial, whether due to fear of the implications or an ingrained prejudice or intellectual laziness, what happens? You must try to resist erecting a wall that shuts out your teacher. Again, we're talking about making your teacher wise, giving him the benefit of the doubt. Know that you have this cognitive dissonance, and it could shatter your view of the world, whatever it is. Well, guess what? You have to start to analyze for yourself. You have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, what is bothering me? What is it about his stance, his position? Is it everything that I've learned up to this point is hanging and he's just, what do you call, pulling the rug out from underneath me? I mean, that could feel very threatening, right? So you have to ask yourself, what is it that I find threatening? Try to track down your objection and articulate it and put it on the table. Identify where your teacher's stepping on your prejudices and hitting a sore point. And strive to rise above your emotions and examine the issue rationally and objectively. Okay? Now, we say it's actually most important to listen to someone else's view. Unbelievable what's happening today with the cancel culture.
Yeah.
I do listen to a lot of right-wing pundits, is that what they're called? Different podcasts. I don't think I have to mention the names. Some of them are banned, totally banned.
Total pundits.
If I mention their name, who knows what could happen to us, right? But you know some of these names, and if they are asking good questions, they're asking good questions. This is what needs to be done. There needs to be the cancel culture, right? It's unbelievable. At least I spoke up. I said what I had to say. Support these people that are just asking good questions. I don't even have to come to any conclusions, but whatever conclusions they're coming to, the government, or I don't know, I call it big pharma, or the bureaucratic. It's a pandemic of bureaucracy. Anyway, whatever is happening here is a travesty to the First Amendment in the United States, called freedom of speech. And it's just making people so dumb and going after, just like sheeple to the slaughter, really, the intellectual slaughterhouse. Okay, I said it. Okay, so it's so important to listen to someone else's viewpoint when they disagree with you. Sometimes the very reason you become so defensive is that deep down you suspect they may be right. So if you find yourself being flippant or dismissing an idea out of hand, this is precisely where you have an opening to grow and where you need to be most careful to remain objective. Override your own biases and have humility to realize you may be wrong. The next idea is, I'm going to call conflict resolution, right? So we have to commit ourselves to broadening our own perspectives and seeing things from the other's point of view, which I mentioned about Shammai and Hillel. Get onto his wavelength and understand where the other person's coming from. Even though you may be sure, 100% sure you're right? So from the moment, play the role of a lawyer for the other side and force yourself to come up with several reasons why the other person may be right. Even if his conclusion is incorrect, there may still be good reasons to accept his belief. Now, apply this technique whenever you get into an argument. This is very difficult for me, but it's an effective tool in healing rifts, particularly when the combatants are tense, emotional, or upset. How many times do I need to? How many times have I said, let's just take a breather? I mean, when I was in yeshiva, chavrusa, we had to do this a lot. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back with, when things are getting really tense. I mean, I really believe I'm right. I really believe he's 100% wrong, and he believes the same thing. And we're not able to work. It's just we're not able to get to the truth. So we have to remind ourselves we're just here to learn and get the ego out of the way, and let's come back with a new slate. And hopefully, when you come back, say, "Okay, now let me tell you what I think I heard you say." And usually, it's not what he said, and that's why all that tension, or again cognitive dissonance. I know I'm right. It's inappropriate. So you might say, "Look, I really want to understand what you're saying. So here are a few reasons why I think you're right. Now, would you mind giving me a few reasons why you think I'm right?" I hope that you could actually do that. But look, if you're totally off, there's no way the other person can do that. But okay. Okay, we talked about Shammai and Hillel already. But putting the other person's position first and trying to understand that other position will help diffuse the tension and ensure that each side understands each other. Right? Just try to imagine how many disagreements could be resolved by using this method. I discussed before the idea of our goal is to come to the truth of all truths, right? We want to know absolute truth, which is quite, I'm going to use the word impossible. Even just saying impossible is probably inappropriate. It's extremely difficult. So, but not impossible. So what happens is like this. When you're, I discussed this, I don't know if I made this scenario up or I heard it from someone else, but it makes sense to me. You have 5 people. Each person thinks they know, let's just say, the truth. And if you're all, let's just take a bottle. You have a bottle of, I don't know, it doesn't matter what the bottle is, a bottle of Coca-Cola sitting in the middle of the table, and everyone has a perspective of what the bottle is. So everyone has really, let's say, 180 degrees of perspective. So out of the 5 of you describing what you see or what you perceive, each one is only giving whatever it is, 1/5 of a description. But listening well and absorbing what the other 4 people say will give you a better idea, again, as close to the absolute truth about this bottle as you possibly can get. Well, that's the same thing about life and about any piece of wisdom. Everyone has a certain perspective, and we're here to learn. We're here to grasp. So you're here to grasp what you cannot see the other person thinking deeply about, but he can share with you, and you can share with them what you see. And hopefully at the end of the day, you'll at least understand their perspective. Doesn't mean you have to accept it in the end, but why wouldn't you if it's objective, as objective could be, and you can accept, and therefore your own viewpoint has become enhanced. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? But unfortunately, there's too much, I don't know, disbelief or maybe judgment about the other person that is going to prevent you from accepting their whatever their perspective is. Okay. So here's an idea, right? The same approach applies to contentious issues in Jewish thought. Let's say a respected teacher taught you a class of understanding what we call hashgacha pratit, divine providence, or hashgacha in general. And now included in this idea is, right, we understand that God is a loving God. So that you're talking about how just God is and how loving he is. Well, guess what? As soon as the Holocaust is brought up, all of a sudden people go ballistic. How can it be a loving God, a just God? What did these people do wrong? 6 million Jews, right? So how many times have I tried to discuss this and I've run into strong emotional opposition? Now, one of the rabbis at Aish Torah, Rabbi Mati Berger, said, and we're talking about 20, 30 years ago, that it's too soon to discuss why the Holocaust happened because there's too much emotionally charged, it's too raw.
Yeah, the
right?
wound is tender, yes.
So let's say you have a certain idea, and then there's obviously various approaches regarding this, such as here he says God and the Holocaust. So the rabbi's approach stirred up anger and resentment in you, and part of you wants to just dismiss his argument. Well, open your mind. This is an ideal time to rise above your emotions and put in the effort to truly understand the rabbi's point of view. Try to examine his sources, articulate his reasoning, right? Go ahead and ask your questions, and then try to meet him to discuss it even further. This serious type of thinking will broaden your own perspective, enable you to understand a very different point of view. Even if you need, at the end, you don't have to agree with it, but at least will help you understand it. The last little paragraph before we go into some of the sources is the Gemara in Avodah Zarah 5b. It seems to explain that it took many years for the Jewish people to really truly understand Moses. And I'll read the verses clearly. But can you imagine, the Gemara is telling us it took 40 years till the Jewish people understood Moses. So what do you expect? You're sitting in front of your rabbi, how long? 3 months, 3 hours, 3 years. It takes a while to really understand. And there's a lot of nuances, where he's coming from, and perhaps even the vocabulary.
His demeanor, yeah.
Yeah. So if that's true, that it takes 40, the Gemara tells us it takes 40 years till you understand your rabbi, so then you need to think and rethink what your teacher says. This certainly applies when you don't fully understand him, or even when you disagree with him. But even if you do agree with what he says, chances are you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? Do not be so sure you have received the full message. You got to go over and over and over again. You have to review whatever he said many times and see if you can get a deeper understanding. And of course, we all accumulate so much wisdom through our own life experiences, and we only begin to unravel within ourselves layers. How much so also for the Rebbe who's teaching us, we're going to unravel layers of depth of our teacher's words, gaining a deeper appreciation and a more nuanced understanding of his wisdom. The more we dig, the more we'll find out how much there is to dig. We've discussed this before. The goal of acquiring wisdom is, again, I think counterintuitive, but when you hear it, you say, it makes sense. When we're talking about humility, right? Abraham said, I am but Anochi Afur Ve'efer. I am but dust and ashes, right? Moses says, Ma Anochi, what are we? What am I? To understand, the more wisdom you acquire, the more you realize how little you know. So the Kliyakar says the goal of acquiring wisdom is to know you know nothing. Like how much wisdom out there is, how much wisdom there is out there. And it's first of all, it makes you a vessel. Like when you let's take an example of a vessel. Every vessel has a thickness of a wall. So on the outside you have 2 cups or 2 vessels. On the outside they look exactly the same because the external vessel is the same shape, but on the inside one has thinner walls. Which one can contain more? I don't have to tell you. The one with the thinner walls, obviously not so thin they would crack and break, but the one with the thinner wall will be able to contain much more, whatever the ingredient is. It's inside the vessel. So this is, if we think about it, right, make your teacher wise. First of all, it's going to take a lot on your part of humility and appreciation. But the idea is to work on your own character, get rid of your own ego. Don't go in there to argue for the sake of arguing. But the less ego you have, the thinner the wall of your vessel, the more you can actually contain.
Wow. I love that analogy. Beautiful.
Okay, so here the first source I just want to show you is in Tainus 7a. So it mentions, why are Torah matters, this is in the name of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, why are Torah matters likened to a tree? So it says in Proverbs 3:18, right? We know this well. It's a tree of life to those who hold on to it. Eitz chayim hi, it's a tree of life, l'machazikim bo, to those who grasp it. Okay, very nice. Now, the analogy here is that the verse is coming to teach you that a small piece of wood, right, they call it kindling, a very small, I don't know if you shaved pieces, whatever it is, it's not a big log, right? A small piece of wood can actually ignite a larger piece of wood. So too minor Torah scholars, meaning in fact, that's a very interesting idea. Never thought of it, but now we call these young rabbis in the Torah, in the Talmud, as embers of what do you call it? Hot coals of the rabbis. Yeah, that's amazing. Hot coals of the rabbis. We call those, budding students, the ones that have a lot of potential. Why? Because they will ignite the larger pieces of wood. So going back to that idea, Eitz Chaim Hilam Chazikim Bo, that's just one interpretation. Obviously, it has many levels and interpretations, but that's an amazing idea. And right away, that's where the Gemara uses that famous statement. Rabbi Hanina says, I've learned much from my own teachers, even more from my colleagues, and I learned the most from my students. Those students are called the hot coals. They ignite the
log.
It makes the teacher wiser. This idea that it took Moses 40 years to really gain the trust as a good teacher. So it says like this, or let's say from the other side, for the students, for the people in the desert to really chop and get an understanding in, there's going to be two verses I'm going to use. Well, actually, they're back to back, but we're going to read 29 in Deuteronomy 29:4 first, and then we'll read 29:3. So going in that order, right? The Gemara says, even Moses, our teacher, who said this to the Jewish people, did not allude to the Jewish people until 40 years that they should have stated this request. Now it says, if you want to read 29.
Verse 4 says, I led you through the desert for 40 years, during which time your garments did not wear out from upon you, nor did your shoes wear out from upon your feet.
Okay, so really it's the first part. I have led you for 40 years in the wilderness. Now keep in mind, that followed the previous verse. So which shows you, all that really was showing you, that was when Moses did this, we'll call this public lecture, this speech, was at the end of the 40 years, right? After 40 years.
Yep.
So
verse 3 says, yet until this day, the Lord has not given you a heart to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear.
So it wasn't until the 40th year, Moses, right? Moses is saying it took you this long. So what do you think? What do you think? That generation was called the Dora Dea, the generation of knowledge. They actually witnessed the revelation. They had gained, right? I mean, again, there were people
first-hand knowledge,
passed on, and people who were born, but for the bulk of them, right, that went through, because people under 20 years didn't die, right? In other words, we say the generation of the desert died, but it wasn't the entire generation. Anybody under 20 entered the land of Israel. So we're talking about a bulk of the people who was following Moses for that 40 years, and people who were born only understood really. They in other words, when the verse says, prior to this, the Lord had not given you a heart to know and eyes to see and ears to hear until this day. So it took a while to really get it. And if that's true by them, as the Gemara concludes, Rebbe said, conclude from here that a person does not understand the opinion of his teacher until after 40 years. As Moses said this to the Jewish people, only after 40 years of learning Torah. Here's an interesting Gemara. Maybe this is a fantastic idea, but the question is, well, how does this relate to the idea that make your own teacher wise? So there were 4 different academies, and each academy believed that their own teacher was the Messiah, was the Mashiach. You can find this in Sanhedrin 98b. So the Gemara is discussing Messiah and whatnot, and then it says, well, what was the Messiah's name? Or what is the Messiah's name? So just keep in mind, I'll just tell you, there were 4 different opinions I don't know if we're going to go through each proof. Maybe I will because it's a fantastic idea. Each one, now, as a way to remember this, the word Mashiach is spelled Mem, Shin, Yud, Chet. Mashiach. If you go through it, each one of these schools had a teacher with the first letter fitting the acronym. So you can already Mem is Menachem, Shin is Shiloh, Yud is Yinon, and the last one is Chanina. Okay? So I'll just tell you the Gemara goes like this. So they asked, what's the Mashiach's name? So the students of Reb Shila, they said Shiloh is his name. And the verse, we're not going to read the verses, but people are probably familiar with Genesis 49:10 about until Shiloh comes, and that's a reference to the Mashiach. The school of Yanai, they said Yinon is his name. Actually, one of my son just got engaged. His name is Yinon, Yaakov Yinon. And there's a pasuk, there's a verse in Psalm 72:17. It says, "May his name endure forever. May his name continue as long as the sun, S-U-N. And many men bless themselves by him." This is a reference to Mashiach. Yinon means forever, and Yaakov lives forever as my son's name after. The other school of Rabbi Chanina, they said Chanina is the name, and there's a verse in Jeremiah 16:13 with Chanina at the end. And then the school of Menachem, ben Hezekiah, they said his name is Menachem. Just amazing. I mean, why is this idea amazing? That each one made, like, if you think of the possibility of your own teacher being Mashiach. Now, I think I said this before. I have students who tell me, I think maybe I'm Mashiach. I think, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but the Rosh Shiva in one of the previous classes said, if you didn't think you were Messiah, I'd be worried about you, because of the sleeping giant mentality, because with the potential that we all have to make a difference in this world. But if you think of your own teacher, just short of an angel, right? And that actually brings us to the next, I think it's the next one. Actually, it's not. I know I have it here somewhere. Maybe I have to go in order, but we'll get to that, this idea. Very important. What I want to show you is, where do we leave off? Maybe, okay. In Chagiga 15b. What do I want to show you here? Let's just start. The Gemara poses a question. See, Rebbe Meir had a teacher. His name was Acher, right? His name is not really Acher. Acher means the other one. Okay, so he went off the derech. He became a heretic, and Rebbe Meir continued to learn from him. So it's a bit of a problem, right? I mean, you have to admit that if your teacher is a heretic, how are you still learning with him? So they asked a question like this. I think this is the Gemara I wanted to show you. But didn't Rabbi Ben Chana say that Rabbi Yochanan said? What does it mean by this verse? It's in Malachi 2:7. So I'll let you read that. Malachi 2:7.
Two seven reads, "For a priest's lips shall guard knowledge, and teaching should be sought from his mouth, for he is a messenger of the Lord of hosts." Okay,
so my translation in messenger, anyway, and here is Malach, is a Malach Hashem. He's an angel of the Lord, right? So what is this idea? That your rabbi should have good character, right? Now, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but Rebbe Meir's Rebbe did not have seemingly good character. in every respect. There was something lacking because he became a heretic. So what is the verse teaching us? If the rabbi is similar to an angel of the Lord of hosts, meaning perfect in his ways, then you should seek Torah from him, from his mouth. But if not, you shouldn't seek Torah from his mouth. So Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Meir found the verse and it interpreted it differently. And that verse is in Proverbs 22:17.
Reads, "Incline your ear and hearken to the words of the wise, and put your heart to my knowledge."
Now, it says my knowledge. So, where do you learn from? You learn from a rabbi, right? So, it implies that as long as you're learning God's knowledge from the person themselves doesn't have to be on the highest level, as long as he's properly transmitting. So, this was the idea that Reish Lakish was trying to say, after we just said that you have to go after a rabbi who's like an angel. Then we had this Reish Lakish explaining that Rebbe Meir must have held this. It doesn't matter about the character. As long as it's, in essence, true, it shouldn't be a problem. Basically, what they do, in the end of the day, is they put them together and understand there is how to resolve the contradiction, and that is that there's no difficulty in this. In this case, when it's permitted to a flawed scholar, it's referring to an adult. So an adult can listen to a flawed scholar, whereas a minor, you want to make sure that because the minor is going to absorb a lot more. But Rebbe Meir himself was an adult and was able to, well, first of all, he was very unique because he would be able to distinguish. When all the other rabbis started criticizing Rebbe Meir for still learning from Acher, some said, you know what? Rebbe Meir is different because he is so advanced in his learning. He could actually be able to distinguish and separate. So just keep that in mind. That's basically the resolution. So the next idea is really it's a Pirkei Avot that we spoke about many times, and that is in Pirkei Avot chapter 1, Mishnah 6. It's really just a few words that I want to take from there, and that is Aseh lecha rav, make for yourself a rabbi. So in other words, we're saying, what's the title? We're talking about making your teacher wise. So make for yourself a rabbi. How do you create a rabbi? You find somebody with potential. Perhaps he has the information, or he has the ability to get the information, and you make him great. You begin to learn with him, even though he's not some famous teacher, but you see the potentials there. You can already start learning with such a person, and put somebody like that on not a pedestal, it's not the word I'm looking for, but a kavua basis. Try to drill the person, get as much, see how his thinking process. If he's brilliant, but he doesn't have that much life experience, give it to him. Give him the life experience. Why not? Okay? So that's what I think is the idea over there. Although I did want to use this book and explain to you what it says over here in the Metifta. I wanted to do that in the beginning, and I got distracted, like always. Okay, 1 second. I think I put let's see, here it is. So, hamachachim es rabbo, we said it's causing your Rebbe to become wiser. Shia talmid noise v'noisim b'divrei rabbo. Basically, the student is involving himself in the give and take of the words of his rabbi, delving deeply, let's say, into the words, umach shelo kushios rabbos, and asking lots of questions. V'ayidei kach, and through this process, yitchachem harav, the rabbi himself will become wiser. And as a result, memela afatalmid yiske b'kach lekatra shel Torah. And as a result, automatically, even the student will receive the reward of what we call the crown, the keter, the crown of the Torah. I don't think there's any argument about that. Okay, so they bring down the whole idea of Reish Lakish. So what are Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? And that's what I want to bring up now. So in Gemara Baba Metzia 84a, so I think we discussed the idea of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and how they met. I don't want to get into that right now, but Reish Lakish ends up marrying Rabbi Yochanan's sister. You can refer to an earlier, anyway, it's a beautiful story how a bandit becomes the greatest rabbi. You know, he does tshuva, he repents from his past life, but he had so much potential and strength and integrity in terms of, he was like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But nevertheless, the most amazing part of the story is that when Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan he lost his own brother-in-law, but he was very saddened, and most because Reish Lakish, Reb Shimon ben Lakish, I would say, fought with him tooth and nail. In other words, he was a great chavrusa. He never let him slide on anything. The Gemara says that he would ask 24 questions, and he would force his Rebbe, which was Rabbi Yochanan, to give 24 answers to every question. Unbelievable. Why that number is used, I don't want to get into that right now, but the idea here is that when Reish Lakish had passed away, they tried setting him up with other study partners. And every single study partner says, "Oh yeah, Rabbi Yochanan, I'll give you support for what you just said. You're so right. Listen, what you're saying, it says over there too." That was not what that wasn't. Well, I'm not so sure if that's what it means, but he was agreeing. He wanted someone to argue with him. He wanted to sharpen himself, and that was what he was missing after the death. It's one of the things he was missing after the death of Reish Lakish. You see how important it is in order to make your teacher wise, again, with respect, good, well thought out questions. Okay, so that's pretty much the material that I prepared. What I'd like to do is just sum up, because this is like, if this would be the end, which it's not, we got two more, I would make a siyum, and I'm going to, I think, Bli Nader, at the end of the 50th one, you should make one now because we really finished, but the Rosh Yeshiva even said, we're not finished. There are different manuscripts, and we might as well cover them. So when a Jew finishes a great work, whether it's a tractate in the Talmud, it depends. If it's just Mishnayos, it's a certain book. We made a big siyum when we finished the Kuzari. It took us 3 years, me and my chavrusa, Rabbi Dr. Moshe Kor. It took us 3 years to finish the Kuzari. We made a party. Yep. So I think we have, in another 2 weeks, however, whenever we'll figure it out, we'll make a little bit of a party. It's a big accomplishment.
Sure is.
Yep.
I remember 10 months ago thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to go on for quite a long time. And I figured, sometime January, February, we'd be done. And, you try to account for the holidays, knowing that you got to take time off respectfully. It's just a joy to see you stick with it and share with us the beauty of this book. This is I remember the first time I read this course in my personal studies a number of years ago. I was just mesmerized. I found the words, even if the lesson was only a short page with a couple of paragraphs, I found that it could unfurl like keep growing and growing. The thoughts in it so profound. If you take it to heart, if you really think about it, the whole purpose, everybody, is about acquiring these traits in order to gain wisdom. And everything the rabbi's been sharing, all 48 so far, is about, you got to look at it as an injection to get you where you need to go. but you got to acquire it. It's got to be taken in and understood,
Integrate it and
integrated.
realize it. And I'll tell you, being around other people that want to grow is the biggest. I'm not going to say just incentive because you have to have the incentive, but it's the propellant, to keep you moving in the right direction. Having community, I know that's very difficult for the B'nai Noach who are spread out quite thin. But today with the internet, it's somewhat helpful. I'm sure it's very helpful, and even to find local people. I encourage you all to find people who are and have a chavruta learning, whether it's the books that are put out by the Noahide World Center, Rabbi Goldberg, or others, or the Tanakh. Learning with, there's so many great teachers online, whether it's personal or just they're teaching the masses, to get a hold of the, I'll mention
But
a
I
few.
think
Why
today's
not?
lesson is so
know?
key about how B'nai Noach should be engaging with their rabbis. They've got to make the teacher wise. In other words, don't be afraid to ask hard questions or difficult questions, but do such in a respectful manner, and you will find the wisdom. I love the analogy today of the coals you talked about, like the kindling, and so I've had the honor of connecting with many B'nai Noach over the last, especially this last year, people that are having certain difficulties with certain fundamentals, and it just just getting questions just opens the opportunity to build relationship. More than that, to let the answers sharpen themselves, and it tends to provoke out of the teacher everything that he has studied in order to give a Torah response. And I find that it's so beautiful. We know, Rabbi, that you've spent a lot of years in study, and I'm sorry I haven't asked you enough questions. I try to look and see if there's any responses online, but this has been quite a journey, and I know we got a couple more classes to go, and you've made it fun. It's been a bit of an uphill journey in the sense that our numbers were real strong in the beginning, but with this introduction on here, I don't know if you folks know, but on specifically Facebook, I have been hit over and over every time I play this intro. I've been hit with a copyright infringement claim from places like Sony and Warner Brothers and even Tour de France making claims to the video, which mainly the song, but we paid for and got copyright permission from the actual author, and we do by the book and do it right. And Hashem, opens the door. I always win when it's have to open a challenge to their claim, and we always win. But the shame is that it blocks. There was a number of weeks where, as soon as I posted the broadcast up on Facebook or something, it was blocked and not available to the public. But yet, so it caused the numbers to dip for several months there. But we're glad to see the numbers come up back again. Don't be afraid to share this course with others, because there's just such beautiful wisdom in it, and we know there's a lot to it. We've been at it for I'd say a year and 3 months, Rabbi, I think, since we started. And it's definitely maybe a year and 4 months even. It's been a journey, but a couple more weeks and we'll have this one completed. And it's definitely a milestone. And I hope and pray that you B'nai Noach that have been following have actually acquired some of these ways to wisdom, or at least it gives you bearings on where you can refer to when you need to, and dive back in and see what the wisdom of the sages have to say on the matter.
Yep. So I'm looking forward to next week.
All right. So Hashem willing, we're on for the same time next week. All right. Well, Baruch Hashem, we wish everybody a beautiful, beautiful week. And thank you once again, Rabbi Poston, for taking the time out of your so busy schedule. We hope that you're blessed at Yiboneh. Folks, you can find him on his website, yiboneh.com, or his YouTube page, Yiboneh, just like it's spelled there on the banner. Check him out. He gets over 30,000 views a week. and his page is well over 1 million. It's been just a joy to get to know you and see your page cross that journey in such a short time. You're a blessing, Rabbi, and everything you're sharing with Yibbenay. We know you're doing good work there in Jerusalem, and we just pray that your success is it continues to grow.
Amen. Keep up the good work yourself and everything you're doing.
Oh, I'm trying. I'm working these night shifts, and I'll tell you, it just kills me for these later afternoon broadcasts. Like when I'm done here, I'm going to hit the bed and probably get about 6 hours sleep, and then I got to work all night again. It's going to be a ton of fun. But Hashem provides, and I'm so thankful and joyful, and working towards maybe someday having a conference up here in my region where we can invite some rabbis from abroad to come and share the light of Torah, and maybe get some Noahides to congregate and let connections come together, and maybe it might just, like you said, coals spark something that might just allow the light of Torah to shine or grow somewhere. And we're so thankful to Hashem for shining such a light on the world, even though we've been through some darkness with this COVID. It's allowed us, B'nai Noach, to actually connect on these online classes, and it's so needed. I think there's definitely a good coming out from it. And so we're going to sign out for today, but we will be back next week, same time, Hashem willing. So have a wonderful, wonderful week, everybody. Bye for now.